Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side of life. It will help us every day, it will brighten all the way. If you keep on the sunny side of life.
Hey there, my name is Joe Martin. I'm pastor at First Baptist in Toledo, Washington. And I thank you for taking a few minutes. This is my midweek cabin talk. And man, it's so beautiful out. And I hope you get a chance to get out in God's creation and look at it. This week, I want to talk to you about a related subject. Since we're talking about honor, becoming a community of honor and honoring mothers in a culture of contempt. I thought we'd take a few minutes to talk about contempt. It's a word that's used in the Bible. We've had a lot of experience with contempt in recent times. People that have really, really negative feelings about other people, people that differ in politics or differ about health issues or healthcare issues, and people have really treated each other badly. And sometimes even Christians have treated each other terribly because they disagreed on how to handle COVID, or they disagreed about one political matter or the other. And so they lose sight of how a follower of Jesus is supposed to treat other human beings. The word contempt is the feeling that a person or thing is beneath consideration, worthless, deserving scorn, even seen as disgusting. And so words are used like that are, they're disgusting, they're awful, they're just a terrible human being. Things like that are said. And these are all terms. Contempt is to communicate scorn for that person, or disdain, or disrespect. And in our pop culture, and even in our political culture, people will like revel in it. They love it. They cheer it. They enjoy it. They'll say, "Psst, burn! You got them, man. You dealt it out to them." John Gottman, who is one of the leading marriage therapists in America, Gottman says he observes that if one or both partners in a marriage are showing contempt toward each other, he considers it the most important sign that a marriage is in trouble. As a matter of fact, he says that he can predict to a 99% accuracy that they'll be divorced in 5 years if they don't learn how to deal with it. And here's what he says. He says, when you communicate with contempt, the results can be cruel, treating others with disrespect, mocking them with sarcasm, condescension. These are all forms of contempt. You see it in the media. You see it online a lot. And here's an interesting thing about contempt. The research found that couples who are contemptuous of each other are more likely to suffer from infectious illness, colds, flu, etc., than couples who are not contemptuous. Contempt is the most poisonous of all relationship killers. We cannot emphasize that enough. Contempt destroys psychological and emotional and physical health. Wow. So there's a lot to be said about this. Now, I think it's pretty safe to say that what is true for marriage is also true for other relationships. Maybe not on the same level, but the low-grade level of contempt can also be super damaging. Now, this Sunday, as I said, I'll be talking about honoring mothers in a culture of contempt. And that we are to be an honoring culture. We could also just call this message, we could say honoring others also in a culture of contempt. And so what we want to talk about is something I've talked about in my Sunday school class, and that these are not necessarily all uniquely my ideas. I've been listening to a lot of people talk about it, different pastors, about contempt and their view on this and how to be a community of honor. But that's what we want to aim toward. This is what the Apostle Paul said in Romans 12:9. Let love be without hypocrisy, not fakey. Abhor what is evil. That means you need to really not like evil things. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Boy, that's important. Give preference to one another in honor. You ought to just outdo each other in honor. Contempt for anyone is a lack of devotional love, of brotherly love. And you know what it is? It's Antichrist. There's a lot of people want to talk about the Antichrist, but contempt is the spirit of the Antichrist. As a matter of fact, Satan himself is really called it means the accuser, the adversary. This is a person who literally, when you operate with contempt, you are running the devil's program. Jesus made this very clear in his teaching in the Gospels. Luke 18:9, listen to what he says about the person who's justified or isn't justified. And he also told a parable to some people who trusted themselves that they were righteous and viewed others with contempt. And that is the critical reality of contempt. You just look down on other people because you think your theology's right, your opinion about this is right. Ford versus Chevy, cat versus dogs, whatever, it doesn't matter. And you trust yourself. You have a high view of your own opinion and perspective. And so the outcome is you view others with contempt. You look down on them. And then he says this story. 2 men went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, very religious, and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and was praying this to himself. God, thank you that I am not like the other people, swindlers, unjust adulterers, or even like this tax collector, the political liberal or whatever he was. Or he was cooperating with the Romans. He was rich, but he was, in his mind, this religious guy's mind, very, very corrupt. I fast twice a week. I pay tithes of all that I get. So he was very contemptuous. He was a fine fellow in his own mind. But the tax collector, standing some distance away, was even unwilling to lift up his eyes to heaven, but was beating his breast, saying, God, be merciful on me, a sinner, which became one of the great prayers of the Middle Ages. In Luke 18:14, Jesus says, I tell you, this man went to his house justified rather than the other. It means right with God. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and who humbles himself will be exalted. This is really important. This is kind of what we talked about last week. Well, it's important for you to remember how terrible, how evil the practice of contempt is. Remember, it was the practice of contempt that was used by those who tortured Jesus, your master. This was their work. This is the way that leadership and governments and political powerhouses, this is the way they operate, to pour so much scorn and contempt on their enemies or people that disagree with them that they just make people just quake at ever crossing them. But listen to what it says, Luke 23:11. And Jesus, this is speaking about Jesus, and Herod with his soldiers, after treating, speaking of Jesus, with contempt and mocking him, dressed him in gorgeous robe and sent him back to Pilate. There's nothing but evil about people who act with contempt, mocking other people. They're evil. And that's when you act that way or when I act that way, and we can sometimes do it unintentionally or sometimes intentionally, we are acting in evil, acting as Antichrist. Those early disciples knew that this sin had to be rooted out and dealt with. It had to be stopped right in its tracks if they were ever going to grow and for God's people, for God's community to be God's new family, to grow in that diverse community that they were supposed to be, Jews and Greeks and bond and free and rich and poor, barbarians even, and the people who were sophisticated. And Paul talked about this in Romans 14:3. He said, he's talking about the conflicts that people have, their opinions about diet. There's a lot of those still, but these were more religious. He talked about in Romans 14:3, the one who eats is not to regard with contempt the one who does not eat, speaking about meat. And the one who does not eat is not to judge the one who eats, for God has accepted him. He's saying you should not deal with each other with contempt. As a matter of fact, he gives a rationale in Romans 14:10. But you, why do you judge your brother? Or you again, why do you regard your brother with contempt? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. You know what? You want to be judged. Don't judge lest you be judged. You'll be judged by that standard. Do not hold your brother or your sister in contempt. It's God they're going to answer to. You know, I want more than anything else as your pastor and your friend. I want to see us at TFBC. I want us to become a community of honor. This is the place where you experience that place. A safe place where you will be appreciated and honored. And this is a good week to begin and practice by honoring your mom. It's really good. So this Sunday at 8 in the morning or 11, we'll have a regular services. I'm going to be talking about honoring mothers in a culture of content. Come gather and start with the first level of honor. Honor God. That's the first thing. So gather in person any way you possibly can. Come for this Mother's Day. And then bring your mom. Bring your kids, bring your grandkids. Maybe they'll learn about honoring. You guys, be sure that you do something that's honoring for mom this week. Just something that says, you're valuable. I honor you. And this will help all of us. It really will. And don't forget, I also have a class called Rebuilding Community, Restoring Community. And it's a breakfast, and it's going to be at 9:30, and you can come. If you've never been in that class or you're in another class, you can still come to the breakfast. It'll be great. We sit around the table, we talk. And then I'm going to talk about a subject that has hit a lot of us. It is directly tied to this whole issue of contempt or honor, and that is about anger. How do we deal with anger? How do we deal with anger in our lives? Anger isn't a sin, but it definitely can take us into sin. And oftentimes it takes us into the sin in these very relationships that really matter in families and in friendships and even in church communities. So I can't wait to see you. Invite somebody, share this with somebody, if it'll help them grow and you benefited. And remember, thank you so much for being a generous giver. A lot of you are giving online. You watch us every week. Somebody says, I watch this all the time online. And so if it's helpful to you, these midweeks let us know and continue to pray for us for sure. Thank you so much for watching.